The leader of the Liberal Party has an opportunity to respect the fact that heating your home in January and February in Canada is not a luxury. And it does not make those Canadians polluters. They're just trying to survive. This from a Prime Minister who burned more jet fuel in 1 month than 20 average Canadians burn in an entire year. So will the Prime Minister ground the jet, park the hypocrisy, and axe the tax hikes?
On this side of the House, we're going to continue to stay focused on direct and real help for Canadians, responding to the challenges they're facing with meaningful measures that are going to help millions of Canadians in the middle class and those working hard to join it.
Just a snippet of the very first question period between Justin Trudeau and Pierre Poilievre. Did it live up to the hype? What does it signal about the upcoming fall sitting of Parliament? It's Thursday. At issue is here. Chantal Hebert, Elamin Abdelmahmoud, Althia and Andrew Coyne. Good to see everyone. All right, Chantal, I'll start with you. What did you make of this first fiery exchange between the two leaders?
Yes, like watching paint dry. It never lives up to the hype. Let's agree on this. Every time the House comes back, everyone says, oh, this is going to be great. And after, 10 minutes, people say, same old, and everything is actually new again from the middle class and those working hard to join it. Remember that line that was repeated time and again by Justin Trudeau after 2015, but also on the Conservative side, because basically what we've seen all week, culminating in today's question period, is a remake of the Carbon Tax is Killing You movie that the Conservatives used over the last term of Stephen Harper and moving forward, possibly because they know that the carbon tax is probably the last thing the Liberals are going to drop. But they've had that battle a few times, and they have lost it a few times.
Elamin, what did you make of this first encounter?
I mean, it's early yet, but of course, it's also theater that is not for all Canadians to consume. It's for people like us. And having said that, as we sort of look at a theater like that, I think one thing that sort of stood out to me is that it appears very clear that Pierre Poilievre's best political weapon. He was the kind of person who used to make these attacks so that the leader of the party didn't have to. Now he's the leader of this party. And he has to kind of shoulder that burden. I think he has to kind of walk an interesting fine line between being a little bit too aggressive, but also, seemingly kind of being on message. So I do think that it was a great question period performance. It's just, I don't think we're used to seeing this kind of performance from a leader. Usually you defer that to one of your attack dogs. In this particular case, he is that attack.
Althia?
I would say they've all become attack dogs. It was interesting to be in the House today. It felt different, I would say that. I mean, it may not have been very exciting. I would say it was a little bit more exciting than watching paint dry, but it definitely did not live up to the hype. What was clear was that both the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Official Opposition seemed to really be enjoying their new roles. And they seemed to be having a lot of fun on both sides of the aisle. I would say the most interesting thing that happened this week in the House of Commons was really on Tuesday when Mr. Poilievre had his first question period, and Randy Boissonnault from the Liberals stood up and said what we were going to see, what Canadians were going to see over the course of several weeks and months, was two competing visions about the future of the country and what both parties think is best. And that, I think, is true. It wasn't really reflected today. But, you do have a very conservative leader of that party now. Somebody who really does believe that there should be no tax hikes on Canadians, who believes that the best social safety net is your family and your community. That is a very different vision than the vision of the Liberal Party. And so I think that we are going to see change. It may not have been fireworks today, but there will be lots to disagree on and lots on policy to disagree on.
Yep. Andrew?
Well, it certainly serves them both to try to emphasize how vast the gulf is between them in rhetoric. When you actually get down into the policy weeds, there's not a huge amount to divide between them, especially since they've both kind of moved together on a couple of issues. The Tories on not opposing the doubling of the GST credit for low-income Canadians, and the Liberals, as we'll discuss, moving on the airport COVID restrictions. Question period. We were reminded of some of its virtues and its defects, and maybe I'll just dwell on the defects for time's sake. questions that weren't questions, answers that weren't answers, and huge exaggeration of the stakes. So the Liberals want to bring in increased social benefit programs to deal with the affordability questions. The Tories want to have tax freezes, so not allowing taxes to increase. Those are both worthwhile things, but to hear either side, either the Liberals are going to reignite inflation with these relatively minor increases in benefits, or if you heard the Liberals talk about it, by freezing the rate of increase on EI and CPP contributions, it's going to mean the end of these programs. Right. So as I say, they both parties tend to exaggerate the divides and the stakes between them because it suits both of their bases to do so. Whereas in Canada, the differences are usually between the 45-yard lines.
Chantal wants in there, yeah.
I do think, though, that there are parties in the House of Commons that are probably worried about how this is increasingly being framed, and it works for both the Conservatives and the Liberals as a Justin Trudeau versus Pierre Poilievre. And I'm guessing that Hanomansing and Yves-François Blanchet have to worry about that.
Yep.
That this becomes so polarized that they are both on the sidelines, as they were this week. In many, many ways, and that this might keep up for a while. And how do they speak for a constituency worth having if this turns into a duel that will have its very last episode in the next election?
Althia,
I thought the dynamic on that score does mean that there has been a change.
Yeah, and potential trouble. Sorry, Althia, you wanted in? Yep.
Yeah, just on that point, I 100% agree with Chantal. I think you saw that today, frankly, this week, even with the NDP kind of repositioning itself, not just in terms of their kind of soft launch of an attack against Pierre Poilievre, but in the grouping of Pierre Poilievre and Justin Trudeau being cut from the same cloth. Slightly different, but both ineffective was what they were saying. And the rhetoric around both leaders is quite interesting. Mr. Trudeau is now entitled, according to the NDP, and Mr. Poilievre is a snake-oiled salesman, a silver-tongued snake-oiled salesman, I think is what Nikki Ashton called him. So you heard similar rhetoric from Jagmeet Singh as well. So it is interesting how they are struggling to position.
Especially because they're supporting the government. So that it makes it a little more complicated for them to criticize them the same
way.
Yeah.
Right? To get up day in and day out, and yet you being the reason why the Liberals are still in power.
Elamin, then Andrew, quickly.
So I will say that, for all the criticism that the NDP has faced for kind of being silent on the cost of living conversation, the Leger poll that was out this week has them up at, around 23%. I think that was a surprising number for a lot of people because they felt like they've been absent from the conversation, but maybe they've been doing a lot of work behind the scenes. And also, one of the key points that I think they should be talking about is maybe the extension of the EI measures that are set to expire this coming Saturday. I'm surprised not to be hearing the NDP talking about them as loudly as it could be.
Andrew, last word to you on that.
Just say, I think the Conservatives have their attack lines have more legs, I think, than the Liberal defense lines, especially since they've seized on this tax freeze thing. So it gives them something to say about how you're going to help people to counter the Liberal thing. But the attack line the Liberals were using in defense of harping on Poilievre's endorsement of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, I think that's got a shelf life of maybe a couple of days before people get really tired of it.
As you heard at the top of the show, the government's moving to end some pandemic travel rules. Vacation requirements, random testing could end by the end of the month. Ottawa is also planning, we are told, to make the ArriveCan app optional. At Issue is back. Chantal, Elamin, Andrew, and Althia. Chantal, what do you make of this? The Conservatives are saying, this is just because we told them to do it. This is just for political timing. The government is saying we don't make any decisions without having data and scientific data to back it. What do you make of the timing? And I think what this does to many to the Conservatives' argument around this as an issue for them.
Okay, scientific data. Well, if there is scientific data to back the government for having kept this in place for the entire summer, it certainly doesn't show in comparison to all the other countries in Europe and elsewhere who dropped all those requirements before the tourist season. So I'm not sure that there's been a huge change in the science at this point. To the Conservative point that they're doing this because of us, well, they were always going to do this for September 30th because the last time they extended all those measures, they were due to expire on September 30th.
Right.
So the deadline was there. It doesn't really matter what happened on September 10th from that angle. But I mean, someone on Twitter this week who is much smarter than me on Twitter tweeted, "This is like your neighbor taking down his Christmas lights on July 1st." And there is a feeling of that among many Canadians, I believe.
Yeah, but does it neuter a little bit the Conservatives' arguments then? Because this was a big issue for Poilievre, certainly during the leadership campaign, Elamin.
No, I think it actually kind of adds fuel to that particular fire, in terms of if the core argument is, hey, key institutions of this government are not working, travel is not working, airports are a mess, and all the evidence was pointing to, the Liberals not necessarily needing to keep ArriveCan all summer around, and then kind of finally coming to this point and then getting rid of it. It just it actually allows the Conservatives to say they acted a little bit too late. That is certainly going to be the argument that they make. But as to whether ArriveCan was helpful to us all summer, doesn't seem like it particularly was in any.
Andrew?
I think you can lay appropriate blame on the Liberals for the airport delays this past summer. I don't think it had anything to do with ArriveCan. I think it's been a fairly transparent attempt for a number of people, a number of different parties and interests to try to scapegoat it. If you're the airlines, for example, and you laid off a bunch of people and then didn't hire them back quickly enough when demand resumed, it's pretty easy to say, no, the problem is this app that it takes 30 seconds to fill out and that nobody looks at after you filled it out anyway. I agree. It probably had a lot to do with some of the problems at the Canada-U.S. border, on the land border, but the blame of it for the airport troubles, I think, is vastly overdone. But look, yeah, we're at a stage where we can afford to remove these restraints. They were going to have to do it sometime anyway, so there is science to back it up. But the timing of it, I don't doubt for 1 second, is driven by politics. You want to take this off the table as a continuing irritant, particularly when your main opponent has made such hay out of it.
Althia?
Although if that was the case, wouldn't they have acted sooner? I think there really is a battle at cabinet between some cabinet ministers who are far more prudent than other cabinet ministers who would have liked this change to happen several months ago. And so, at first it seemed like the prudent side was winning, and now the prudent side is coming on side with the others who've been calling for this for a while. I mean, I think it's not a very exciting story, but I think that's the story. The story is, yes, they have not shown us the data for why they're moving now. Chantal is right. In fact, they haven't even shown us the data for changes that they made in July. Like, if you'll recall, in the middle of the summer, they changed the way testing was done. It was no longer done at the airport. It was done either at home and a bring home kit virtually, or you went to the pharmacist. And now we don't even know if that worked because that data is still not on the internet. But I think there is a good case to be made that the government, facing lower death counts, people are still dying of COVID. Like the last week that's posted, 217 people died. We shouldn't forget that. But the risks are lower. There is different ways to treat COVID. Hospitals are no longer being swarmed. So, I mean, the government is acting based on the advice that they've received. Could they have acted sooner? Yes, probably.
Okay, I got to leave it there for this week. We will have much more to talk about next week, I'm sure. Thank you. Nice to see you all. And that is it